And we also observe the opposite side being 50 centimeters. Now, in this specific scenario, we have two options. We can either use sin, because dividing the opposite with the hypotenuse will result in an answer, or we can use tan, dividing the opposite with the adjacent will give us an answer. But we cannot use cos, because dividing the adjacent with the hypotenuse will not produce an answer. There simply isn't enough information to use cos. Now let's go over that again. We cannot use cos because dividing the adjacent with the hypotenuse will not give us an answer, because there simply isn't enough information. As you can see, the adjacent value is unknown, and so is the hypotenuse. But when we use sin or tan, we could produce an answer because at least one of those are known. The opposite is known. So when using sin, we have something to work with. That's the 50 centimeters. When using tan, we also have something to work with. That's the 50 centimeters. So either sin or tan is acceptable, but not cos. Now, if you remember the triangle we just looked at, I told you guys that it was time to solve it. Remember that there was only two methods we could use. It was either sin or tan, because cos could not be used. The reason cos could not be used is because there was not enough information. Now let's have a look at how to use sin. When using sin, it is not quite different as using tan. Now let's look at how to use sin. Remember that sin equals opposite over hypotenuse. The first thing you do when solving is you have to write out the formula. As you can see, write out the formula. Sin equals opposite over hypotenuse. After you have finished writing out the formula, you must substitute the values in the given formula. As you can see, for sin, I used sin of 7 degrees. I used sin of 70 degrees because the angle we were using was 7 degrees. I also substituted the opposite value, which was 50. For hypotenuse, there was no value, so you can put an X to represent that is what you want to figure out, the hypotenuse. After you do that, you write out the formula again, so it is easier for you to solve and work with. When writing out the formula again, make sure you write it out this way and include the 1 at the bottom of the 70, so it's easy for you to further work with it. After you have written out the formula again, it is time to cross multiply. When cross multiplying, make sure you cross multiply this way. As you can see, we cross multiply and we multiply the 1 with the 50. That becomes 50. We also multiply the x with sine of 70. After multiplying, our final answer is 50 equals x sine of 70. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. After you have cross multiplied, it is time to isolate x, the value you want to find out. When isolating x, make sure you isolate it accordingly. As you can see in this scenario, we divided it by the sine of 70. Now, you can imagine that when dividing x sine of 70 by sine of 70, it will leave you with only x, meaning that we have isolated x. Now, when dividing 50 with the sine of 70, make sure you use your calculator. Now, this is when it gets a little tricky as well. Here we're left with dividing 50 with the sine of 70. It is easy to divide x sine of 70 with sine of 70 because that just leaves you with x. So that's the easy part. After using your calculator, you should get the answer of 53.2088862. The next step is rounding. After rounding, you should get 53.2, and there you have it, your hypotenuse side. Now this way we have found using sin. Using sin, we found out the hypotenuse side. Now let's see when we use tan, what will that give us? Let's have a look at tan. Again, when using tan, we write out the formula accordingly. Tan equals opposite over adjacent. We substitute the values accordingly. Tan of 70 equals opposite 50 over adjacent. In this case, is x. We write it out again so it's easier for us to solve. Then we of course cross multiply. Again, we have to isolate the x. To isolate the x, you have to divide by the tan of 70. After isolating the x, you're left with 50 divided by tan of 70. You should use your calculator and you should get the answer of 18.1. After rounding, you should get around 18.2 as x. As you can see, in this case, using tan produced the adjacent side, while using sin up here produced the hypotenuse. So there you have it. That's how you solve. Hope this helped. Thank you for watching my tutorial. I hope I left any questions you had answered. Also, I'd like to give you a few tips before I conclude this tutorial. The number one tip I have for you is never rush and take